They were in the French Alps that week. Gstaad or Chamonix? Does it matter? One of the usual places. Epstein liked chalets, stone timber homes that kept no records and came with staff trained in discretion. It made up for occasionally having to ski. Prince Andrew was lounging under a polar blanket, not particularly interested in the snow outside. His eyes were on the TV. The sound was low. A Canadian boy was racing, snowboarding, a sport just barely on the radar of anyone with titles or money in 1993. But the boy's name flashed across the screen. Ryan Wedding, Thunder Bay, Ontario. Epstein lowered his coffee and tilted his head. That's the one I was telling you about. Ryan James Wedding was 12 years old and still unknown outside Canadian snowboarding circuits, but the race that season, the one that got him noticed, was a junior competition in British Columbia. He had just moved from Thunder Bay with his family, but their influence and footprint remained rooted back east. The Weddings had money. He'd grown up on the family's private ski resort in Ontario, an expensive property to upkeep, Epstein noted. That made the carrot more obvious, and you always start with the carrot. Ryan James. Wedding grew up as the favored child in a family that treated the outdoors as inheritance. Skiing wasn't a pastime but a shared creed, and with a private hill at his disposal, Ryan was on skis almost as soon as he could stand. His grandfather put him behind the wheel before he could reach the pedals. His father let him sit for hours at a drafting table drawing meticulous scaled buildings. The stillness of that precision lived beside an appetite for risk. Riding his bike alone down remote logging roads, slipping into neighbors' garages to handle their tools, testing boundaries because no one ever told him not to. Nothing in his childhood was chaotic or deprived. He simply learned early that competence earned freedom and that fearlessness was expected of him rather than corrected. They say he was a snowboarder, a promising athlete. They say he went to the Olympics. They say he got involved with cocaine later and that the descent was fast. But that's all a dodge, because the real story doesn't start on the podium. It starts with the mountains. There is a quiet triad of mountains underpinning the origin story. 3 private ski resorts, each owned or controlled by a central figure in this narrative: Jeffrey Epstein, Prince Andrew, and Ryan Wedding's uncle, Craig Spice. Epstein's ski-in, ski-out chalet in Vail, Colorado, obtained via a trust transfer from Libet Johnson in the late 1990s. Andrew's access to the Verbier estate in Switzerland, co-owned with Sarah Ferguson until 2022, and Spice's long-held ownership of the privately operated ski hill in Thunder Bay, Ontario, form a triangle not just of geography, but of social and operational infrastructure. These types of properties function as closed systems, high-altitude havens where activity leaves little trace. Guests are known in advance, and transactions, be they financial, political, or illicit, occur far from scrutiny. It begins to resemble a Hawala-style exchange, but with time and terrain as currency. Resort owners trade time at each other's locations, sometimes directly, often informally, shielded by the language of leisure. Within this network, access is everything. A promising snowboarder whose family owned one of these hills would have been visible early. A young man circulating among them with equipment, cash, or sealed items could be explained away. The triadic structure here, property, privacy, and plausible deniability, offered the perfect stage for intersecting agendas to converge long before anyone publicly knew their names. Ryan's family had moved to British Columbia in 1993, though his uncle continued to own the resort for 23 more years. But the environment that enabled this had already been built. In the early 1990s, the ski chalets of Switzerland and the French Alps weren't just vacation destinations, they were laundering environments. Epstein had already begun leveraging them for precisely this reason: elite enclaves with low scrutiny, constant cash flow, and cultural norms that masked operational secrecy as wealth eccentricity. He had ties to financiers, royals, politicians, and shell corporations disguised as investment vehicles. What Epstein needed was not girls. That cover would come later. What he needed were logistics solutions. Someone who could reliably cross borders, pass through security, and carry items, currency, documents, access devices, without inspection. And that's where Wedding fit. A teenager on the rise, smart enough to follow instructions, desperate enough to believe in mentorship, and isolated enough to be controlled. They came up with the perfect cover: the bear. It didn't belong to him, not originally, and anyone who actually knew him would have said as much. But once it was there, it became part of the script, always in hand, always in photos, always just present enough to be noticeable but harmless. It was the kind of thing people remembered vaguely, if at all, quirky, sweet, maybe even a little sad. It drew attention the way a magician draws your eye before the trick. But the real function was practical. The bear was dense enough to be gutted and refilled, sewn and resewn. It was soft, resilient, compressible, and never questioned. It could hold cash, keys, codes, or a chip, and move through airports, hotels, and border checkpoints under the smiling indulgence of adults who thought they were seeing a boy clinging to comfort. In reality, it was the uniform of a role he never chose but learned to play to perfection. With Epstein's support, Ryan didn't just rise, he soared. Over the next few years, he began traveling constantly. Competitions in Alberta, sponsorship exposure in Whistler, and eventually races in Europe and Japan. By the time he was 16, his name was circulating among Olympic development scouts. His travel record resembled that of a corporate executive, and his competition equipment was top-tier and constantly evolving. Unusually so, not just new boards, but modified ones, customized bindings, re-engineered cases. It wasn't just about performance, it was about compartmentalization. Every innovation increased the payload. This was still the 1990s. Air travel was casual. Pre-9/11, customs barely glanced at young athletes, especially ones traveling with national teams. Bags weren't opened if you had the right credentials. And snowboarding came with a lot of bags. Boards, bindings, tuning kits, cold weather gear, a quirky sports stars teddy bear, and custom gear. No one ever searched any of it. By 1996, he was flying internationally with regularity. By 1997, he had elite sponsorships. None of this was outlandish. But the velocity of his career, combined with his access and behavior, suggests orchestration. His family could not have funded the entire operation, nor could his results alone explain the volume of travel. What does explain it is the presumption of third-party backing, silent funding that kept his boots in motion and his bear loaded. Through the late 1990s, money laundering was still mostly analog. It required physical movement of value, cash, bearer bonds, jewels, and Epstein's model required a rotational system of couriers who didn't know the full shape of the network. But Wedding, because of the sustained nature of his role, came to understand it. Not just the mechanics, but the code. This is where the triadic system comes into play. Epstein rarely communicated anything that looked like business. His emails, as later confirmed in partial disclosures and testimony, were composed with intentionally childish affect. Spelling mistakes, erratic punctuation, rambling prose. But there was a structure. The key to deciphering it lies in triadic coding, a principle borrowed from Cold War cryptography and early laundering operations. Each triad sat within a phrase, and phrases were separated not by punctuation but by character doubling. 2 commas, 2 exclamation points, 2 vowels in a row, the breaks signaled compartmentalized payloads of information. The emails look salacious to the untrained eye. Talk of dollhouses, swimming bears, butterfly rides, always laced with misdirecting sexual innuendo. But the trained eye sees the pattern of punctuation by strange use of double commas and seemingly misplaced words. And within these messages there were triadic units, symbolic phrases, each carrying one element of a transactional logic. Some indicate origin, transit, and destination. Some sender, courier, and recipient. Some asset, quantity, and valuation. One need only memorize the key. Wedding's knowledge of these codes, how they were structured, how the substitutions worked, which names mapped to which roles, was not incidental. He had to know it. He was the one carrying the items, and the kid was a natural. By 2000, he was traveling more than he was home, living in airports, training in 4 countries a year, carrying thousands in untraceable cash under the padding of his snowboards or stitched inside his bear. Whether he was moving money, documents, keys, or lists, and where, no one can say for certain, except for him. But then in 2001, money laundering underwent a dramatic shift from physical cash-based systems to digital financial architecture. Before this transition, most laundering relied on bulk cash smuggling, shell corporations with paper records, and high-volume cash businesses to absorb illicit funds. Couriers like athletes or entertainers, frequent flyers with little scrutiny, were ideal for discreetly moving currency across borders. But the post-9/11 landscape, especially after the USA Patriot Act, triggered sweeping global reforms. Banks were suddenly required to implement strict know-your-customer protocols, file suspicious activity reports, and comply with international anti-money laundering rules. These measures made cash-heavy laundering far riskier and easier to detect. In response, laundering networks migrated into digital terrain. Sophisticated structures emerged, trade-based laundering using false invoices, offshore shell companies, funneling layered transactions, and encrypted communications coordinating international wire transfers and mirror trades. Tools like PGP encryption, anonymous prepaid cards, and secure messaging on modified BlackBerries replaced the need for face-to-face drops. This era created a hybrid laundering model where the fastest route to clean money was no longer through duffel bags, but through digital infrastructure. And just like that, Epstein had no more use for Ryan. "I'll expose you," he protested, but Epstein just laughed. "What can you prove?" They didn't speak again. But Ryan didn't care yet. He'd only been doing it to snowboard anyway, and he knew he was the best. The 2002 Olympics were coming up, and he was on the team. Everything he'd compromised and sacrificed, he'd made it through. And then he placed 27th. Didn't even make it past the first round. He couldn't figure out what happened. He always won. Had they been rigging events? The questions tore at him, but they were moot. No sponsor and no new sponsors coming after that finish. He was retired at 23, and gone were the illusions. All he had left were the memories of helping the richest people in the world commit crimes, and the knowledge that they had just thrown him away, but he would figure out a way to make them pay. After the 2002 Games, Ryan did 2 years at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, mostly working out. He took work as a bouncer, a job that recalibrates a person's instincts quickly. Nights spent mediating fights, imposing order with physical presence, and navigating rooms full of intoxicated strangers normalize a particular kind of force. It sharpens confrontation reflexes, teaches how to size up threats, and exposes a worker to the criminal edges of nightlife. Unregulated cash, club suppliers, off-book security, people who trade favors in the shadows behind the bar. For someone already conditioned to operate under pressure, it was a short step from managing volatility at the door to managing risk inside the networks that fed those environments. The logic of the work, enforcement, discipline, compliance, debt management, translated seamlessly into the operational demands of trafficking networks, where authority is measured in control, reliability, and a willingness to act when others hesitate. But it had no purpose, and he dropped out, and he returned to what he knew: borders, motion, concealment. The snow wasn't a thrill anymore. It was a cover. In the spring of 2003, somewhere between Vancouver and Whistler, Wedding quietly re-entered the logistics trade. This time, not for Epstein. This time, for himself. The networks were already in place. He hadn't just been carrying teddy bears and snowboard bags all those years. He'd been learning the routes: Vancouver to Los Angeles, Montreal to Miami, European chalets, Caribbean marinas. He'd memorized customs protocols, knew which airports used dogs, which terminals rotated staff more frequently. It wasn't just about drug routes, it was about systems. He understood them intuitively because he'd been part of a system since he was 14. By 2005, the signs were already there, if you knew where to look. frequent trips to California, long stays in Miami, luxuries that didn't align with visible employment. Wedding's name surfaced quietly in the RCMP's wire chatter, not as a user, not even as a dealer, but as a mover. A man with connections, a man who could get things across. Cocaine mostly. The high-end, the clean stuff, white as the slopes he used to race. He didn't touch heroin. That wasn't his trade. He wasn't flashy, not yet. But the money was real. But knowledge is always more valuable than money. So came 2006. Police surveillance indicated his coming and going from a warehouse property named 18 Carat Farms. The wattage being consumed left no doubt as to its purpose. Almost like clockwork, on September 22, 2006, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police raided the property and shut down the 6,800 cannabis plant operation. But they couldn't find any evidence to make a case against him. Watching, taking notes, correlating how the signals had led to the response, Wedding considered the sacrifice worth the information, and that was the closest they'd ever get to him. But for all the system knowledge he'd absorbed, money posed a new problem, not the earning of it. He could move product and extract value. The problem was getting paid, and paid in a way that didn't leave trails. That's when he was introduced to Hassan Shirani, a Persian Canadian with quiet influence and a brush or two with law enforcement, including a murder investigation he'd narrowly escaped. Shirani didn't impress Wedding at first. What impressed him was Shirani's access. Hawala was the first real innovation Wedding had seen in years. Most people don't understand it. It's not a bank, not a crypto wallet, not even really a financial institution. Hawala is older than banks. An informal value transfer system dating back over 1,000 years, originally built for caravans moving goods across ancient Asia. It survives because it doesn't need infrastructure, only trust. If you're in Vancouver and need to get $100,000 to Tehran, you go to a hawaladar, a broker who probably runs a car dealership, a currency exchange, maybe a back room behind a Persian rug store. You hand him the cash. He makes a call and your recipient in Iran collects the money from a counterpart within the hour. No digital footprint, no international wire. Or you drop money off in one country, travel to another, and pick it up at another outlet. Just a handwritten note and a code word. And every so often the hawaladars square their ledgers through goods, services, or subtle interbank balances. Wedding understood immediately. It was the same logic Epstein had used in the 1990s. Distributed movement, no direct links, the system working because each part believed in the others. But here, it was purer, a real network, global, invisible, and necessary for his revenge. But he needed to go deeper. So in June 2008, he went with Shirani on a new plan, ambitious, simple in design, with the potential to make them both serious players. The play? Moved 24 kilograms of cocaine into Canada by sourcing it through a contact in San Diego. The money? Handled by Hawala, naturally. Shirani walked into a brokerage front in Vancouver and quietly deposited $300,000. No banks, no questions. The funds would be made available on the other side of the border. On June 10th, they flew to Los Angeles, acting like what they were pretending to be, guys with money, connections, and enough swagger to make it all look plausible. At LAX, they met their broker on the U.S. side, Michael Krapchon, a Russian-Canadian fixer who brought along the supplier, a man called Yuri, ex-KGB, built like a refrigerator. The tension was immediate. Yuri thought the deal would go down that day, right from the airport to San Diego. Shirani and Wedding explained they needed time. The money was coming through the system, not stuffed in a suitcase. Yuri didn't like that. He questioned the plan, questioned why he'd been brought there. Everyone lied a little, but no one backed out. For the next 3 days, the crew moved in and out of malls, Persian hookah lounges, and discreet storefronts. They collected $120,000 in cash from a Hawala office hidden behind a rug shop, the money bundled in newspapers and stashed in the hotel TV stand. They gave $17,000 to Krapchon to source a sample kilo from Yuri. Everything felt slow and just slightly off. On June 13th, they met again, this time in a hotel room in San Diego, expecting the handoff. Krapchan went out to fetch the sample. Wedding and Shirani waited in the room, hungry, impatient, calculating risk. After 90 minutes, they left to get lunch. That's when the FBI moved in. It had all been a setup. Yuri was wired from the moment he met them at LAX. The cocaine was part of a controlled delivery. The Hawala route was being watched. Krapchan was already in cuffs. The feds made short work of the rest. That moment, the arrest, was when something shifted. Most men caught in a federal sting talk, if not to help themselves, then at least to bargain. But Wedding didn't say anything. At the strip search, he looked an agent in the eye and called him a homosexual, perhaps like a man who endured similar treatment before, but certainly like a man whose rage predated the moment. To the FBI, he came off as hostile, arrogant, but he was kicking himself. First, it had been Epstein, groomed, used, discarded, now betrayed again. The arrest could be useful, it gave him credibility, but it meant delay. From 2009, during the 17 months Wedding spent awaiting trial, he was held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in San Diego. He faced some pretty serious charges: conspiracy to distribute cocaine, and the standard machinery of the federal system kicked in. Investigations, interrogations, monitored phone calls, and a close evaluation of his credibility. In the months before trial, he was held on bail and then remanded, and during that time, he was busy. He bragged about the good connections he was making in prison to the dismay of the officers. Taps of his conversations appeared to show conversations at least 5 different girlfriends in Canada, each one believing they were the only one. These patterns suggested both distraction and that he had a concealed logistical structure already in place. Then at trial the following year, Shirani flipped, claimed he was just logistics, that Wedding was the boss, the bankroll, the man behind the plan. Wedding was the only one to fight the charges. He said he was here to buy cars, that he'd been duped, brought along as cover. The courtroom, it became a battle of perceptions. Wedding, inexpensive Ed Hardy, bulky from training or steroids or both, silent and coiled. Shirani in a suit. The jury found Wedding guilty of conspiracy to distribute cocaine. 80 to 100 months was standard for such crimes. But at his sentencing hearing, Wedding got 48 months minus time served, allegedly on the basis of an oral statement of contrition. On Valentine's Day 2011, while still incarcerated, Wedding married an Iranian-Canadian woman. The exact circumstances of how they met remain undisclosed. The timing and the rapid shift in his personal relationships suggest a strategic pairing, a marriage that may have been arranged or facilitated to serve purposes beyond affection, particularly to connect him to Iranian-linked money laundering networks, or maybe to provide a cover legitimacy within Vancouver's finance and real estate scene. Shortly afterwards, by late 2012, he was back in Canada, though the circumstances are murky. While he may have been deported, there are no mentions of such an order in his wanted notices. For a non-citizen convicted of a major drug offense to return to Canada without a paper trail strongly suggests some form of cooperation, though none has been admitted by American officials. Later in 2012, shortly after Wedding's return to Canada, his new wife became a person of interest in a troubling case, a Vancouver area kidnapping in which a man was held captive for 20 hours and threatened at gunpoint. Wedding was never charged in the incident, but circumstantial details do raise questions. Police reports note that the victim was in direct phone contact with Wedding's wife during the ordeal, a fact she has never publicly explained. Her subsequent absence from any further public records on Wedding is striking as well. She has not been charged despite connection to multiple criminal cases, and she has refused to comment for media inquiries. One plausible interpretation supported by the timing and patterns is that Wedding used the incident to sever ties, possibly by revealing to the victim that his wife had been acting as a conduit or surveillance asset. If so, the phone call was a signal, not to coordinate, but to expose. From that point on, she is functionally erased from his story, and her silence suggests either institutional protection, fear of reprisal, or a forced exit from the network they had once shared. Between 2012 and 2014, Wedding established residence in Coquitlam, British Columbia. He declared bankruptcy, reported no income, and leased a large pickup truck. On paper, he appeared broke. In reality, he was moving in circles tied to large-scale laundering. By 2014, he adopted a bankrupt front while quietly aligning himself as a broker between Iranian-Canadian financial networks and narcotics proceeds. In 2014 and 15, key events revealed the full shift of his role from courier to broker. In 2014, he filed for bankruptcy, likely a false front supporting covert reintegration into the laundering grid. In 2014 and 15, the Operation Harrington investigation by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police identified him as the man in charge of a major cocaine import and laundering network that spanned Iran-linked money flows and the Mexican cartel logistics network. And in 2015, when charges were laid against many involved, Wedding was already vanished, absent from arrests, untouched by police. That disappearance signals more than evasion. It suggests extraction via a safe corridor and full embedding with the Sinaloa cartel or an equivalent protected structure. By 2014, he was operating from Mexico, outside Canadian jurisdiction, invisible to most law enforcement. His trajectory had fully shifted, from teenage athlete carrying a teddy bear and snowboard to transnational broker controlling routes of drugs, money laundering networks, and the codes of covert finance. When Operation Harrington's raids swept Canada and Montreal, they found the network, but not Wedding. He had already moved on. The official version of events goes like this. Sometime in early 2024, the US and Canadian authorities finally found their crack in the armor of Ryan Wedding's billion-dollar smuggling empire. A man named Jonathan Acevedo Garcia, Canadian-Colombian, mid-tier logistics, reportedly a longtime associate of Wedding's second-in-command, Andrew Clark. The story says that Acevedo flipped, gave up the network, and sparked Operation Giant Slalom, the largest cross-border narco initiative targeting a Canadian-born suspect in a generation. By fall of 2024, the DEA had made their move. Homes were raided, trucking fronts were shut down, and 14 arrests were made. Then came Guadalajara. Clark, Wedding's number 2, taken down during a Mexican Navy sting in October. But there's a problem with this story. Acevedo was never arrested. He was living freely in Medellin, Colombia, after supposedly turning informant on one of the most dangerous cartels in the world. No custody, no witness protection, just lunch at a mall food court, until a man with a silenced handgun walked up behind him and put 5 in the back of his skull. And just like that, the state's star witness disappeared before he could testify. The case collapsed into uncertainty. Charges hung in limbo. Trials delayed. But what if the premise is wrong? What if Acevedo Garcia never flipped? What if he didn't even know his name was being used? What if Ryan Wedding impersonated him, anonymously, through burner channels, encrypted message drops, and controlled leaks, to turn in the entire operation from the outside? That would explain the timing, the precision, the sudden arrests across jurisdictions, the use of real, verifiable information to produce maximum damage, but in a way that preserved Wedding's own position. It would also explain why Acevedo was left dangling in Colombia with no protection, because he had no idea. Now, why would Wedding do that? Because that's the pattern. Epstein groomed him as a teen, then cut him off and discarded him. Shirani used him, lied about their roles, then flipped at trial. The Canadian government ignored the signs. The US authorities tried to leverage him, then lost control. Every institution he was part of tried to use him, so he started using them back. Wedding doesn't trust criminals, but he doesn't trust governments either. His life is a burned bridge, and if you follow the sequence, it reveals someone who never forgets, never forgives, and never stops watching. He was trained by a global predator, then dropped into the bloodstream of elite crime. He knows how laundering works. He knows the courier routes. He knows the codes. And now, he's the last one alive who does. The scenario is less far-fetched than it might seem at first glance. If Wedding fed the U.S. details under Acevedo's identity, He could offload disposable components of the cartel structure in Canada. He could clear out rivals who were drawing attention or skimming from the top. He could even position the cartel itself to take the fall, inviting scrutiny from governments already eager to dismantle foreign drug networks, or perhaps simply guiding their assets where he wants them in the Caribbean, and all the while he remains untouchable. No prints, no voice, just data. And once the job was done, Acevedo was the contact with Canada. If the Canada operation was blown, the cartel's usual narrative would become self-fulfilling, and the last man alive who could dispute any part of the story is gone. But why now? Look to the pattern. Wedding didn't vanish in 2014 because he was scared. He vanished because he was ready. He left with a plan, and he needed resources. Now he has them, which brings us full circle to the end game. If Wedding could dismantle the Sinaloa network in Canada with a few encrypted message drops, now imagine what else he could do with his billions. He took out a pipeline that spanned 3 countries, 6 trucking firms, and a multi-ton distribution channel. He did it with no organization, no warrant, and no backup. And yet, for nearly a year now, he has been biding his time, because he needs one more thing: the files, the money trail that only he can decode. Every financial crime Epstein ever facilitated, and all the guilty, and all the hidden gold. And that's what has the powerful scared, because Wedding doesn't move for money anymore. He moves for revenge. And now he only needs to wait, because the files are scheduled to be released by law within the month. And so, on November 19th, 2025, immediately after the Epstein bill passed, the FBI's reward for Ryan James' Wedding was raised to $15 million, the highest reward ever offered. Because the only way to bury a secret that dangerous is to bury the man who carries it. And so the race is on.